So let's assume you've been doing this hypotheticals. Every politician loves hypotheticals, but to get an insight on the future we would be voting for if we voted for Australian Conservatives. Let's assume you've been on a track for a while and the brand is established and you now have some majority and presence and you've got so many candidates that you've actually been able to form government. And in this hypothetical, Cory Bernardi is now Prime Minister of Australia. So, Mr. Prime Minister, what should we do about climate change? What is your government policy to do for Australia now? What's our position?
Well, nothing Australia does in regards to its emissions trading scheme or emissions is going to change the climate at all. I'm all for cleaner energy, I'm all for less pollution, but let's not dress it up as something that it's not. Climate change is an entirely natural occurring phenomena, and even if it's been driven by anthropogenic carbon dioxide, nothing Australia's emissions reduction is going to change that one jot or tittle.
So coal has a future under an Australian Conservatives government?
The Australian Conservatives government is entirely electricity generation agnostic. We just do not believe in subsidising electricity generation. It corrupts markets, it makes things more expensive, and the lived experience of that was demonstrated and has been demonstrated in South Australia. If clean energy stacks up, let them build it. If nuclear energy stacks up, let them build it. If coal-fired power stations and gas-fired power stations stack up, let them build it. Let competition provide a better result for every consumer and every business in this country.
Okay. Mr. Prime Minister, what exactly will you do for freedom of speech now that you have the balance of power or government in both the lower and upper house?
Well, at the very least, I would amend Section 18C to remove insult and offend. I'm speaking in the past tense now. When I was a backbencher, we brought in reform of that. It wasn't supported by the Parliament. But I think there's a stronger case. I mean, the misuse and abuse of organisations like the Human Rights Commission is just bogged people down in lawfare. We have advocates for discontent in being publicly funded. It's outrageous. And so if you want leaner, more streamlined and effective government, you have to examine all of those sorts of commissions that have sprung up that are being misused to make people's lives more difficult rather than empowering them.
Are those commissions redeemable, or are they a path to destruction?
Well, if you seek to redeem it, you're talking about replacing the personnel on it. It's a very temporary solution because, what changes you can affect can always be undone in the future. You just have to ask yourself, why are we spending millions of dollars on, tribunals that are acting against our national interest, on commissions that are acting against our own citizenry? It seems nonsensical, and so I'm all for a more efficient, leaner government, and that means we'd go through every single line item in the budget. It means we'll go through every single organisation, quasi non-government body to assess whether they're still working towards the intent they were implemented or originated under.
Good. So I imagine one of the glaring line items in that review would be the ABC and the SBS.
Yeah, you'd be right. You're absolutely right. You have to ask yourself, and this is the question, why are we funding 8 publicly subsidised or fully funded television channels? Why do we have, maybe 10 radio networks being publicly funded? I actually support the role of the ABC, particularly as a broadcaster into regional and rural communities in Australia. I think it is important that we have that voice in there, not a government voice as such, but that we have the ability to communicate with every Australian when necessary. But simply, it's much too big. I don't see why the SBS and ABC should exist. They should at the very least merge. I think they need to cut their cloth to fit the taxpayer's purse, and the taxpayer should be paying much, much less than what they currently are.
3 very closely related items are national spending, national borrowing, and national debt. We currently have more debt than we can hope to pay off in a generation in normal circumstances. Our continued borrowing is literally borrowing from our children, people who don't get a say about how we're spending their money. It's immoral, intergenerational debt. What will your government do immediately to solve that? Not wanting to make another 10-year budget, but in this term of government, in the next 3 years, what will have to be cut?
Well, I'm glad you've cloaked it in a moral context, because it is a moral obligation that we have to our children. But we want government to live within its means. That's the most important thing. I also believe that Australian taxpayers are paying too much in tax already. We can stimulate our economy, we can grow our economy, create jobs by empowering people to keep more of their own money. Now, one of the budgeting techniques that I think is really effective is that you go line by line item through the budget and you ask yourself the question, if we were starting again today, would we keep this line item in there? Is this expenditure still acting for the reason that we implemented in? Is it still achieving the results that we wanted? Now, a lot of the time, you find there's this, eternal life in budget measures. They just keep going because no one has the strength to get rid of them. We have to have that courage and strength. And secondly, if we're going to continue with that particular budget, we should expect some efficiency savings to be made in that space. And that says, well, okay, let's do this 10% cheaper. Let's make it more effective. You can do that by removing duplication. It's often said, the education system is run by the states, as it should be. But why do we have such a massive federal education department? What are we duplicating here? Is it just a matter of shuffling money around? Well, there's got to be a better way to do that. So we want to reduce bureaucracy. We want to empower people to make decisions for themselves so that government's not doing it. It is a cultural shift, but it's got to start with a budget shift.
Your opposition will make hay out of the cuts that you're proposing, cuts to public spending, cuts to public sector jobs, and as extreme as it needs to be, it's entirely likely that the opposition will simply offer the voters more money, the money that you're taking away from them perceptibly, just to win an election next time, and you may be a one-term government. Is there a way you can negotiate that risk, that voter intelligence, without risking actually giving away the opportunity to do more?
Well, Dave, I love talking as if I'm the Prime Minister, but the reality is, if it ever gets to a point where Australian Conservatives are forming government, it would be because things have got to a circumstance where people know there's got to be a better way of doing things. We've never hidden our light under a bushel. We're not pretending to be anything that we're not. We are saying that we need stronger families. How do you do that? That's they're the answers that we're going to.
So those criticisms from your opposition will be stating the obvious, because it was always declared.
It's always
ambition.
there, and we know that more of the same is going to deliver more of the same results, and the results are bad. The results are bad. I mean, if you look at education, literacy and numeracy has been diminishing no matter how much money you throw at it. If you look at families, they're fragmenting. Civil society is fragmenting. We no longer have the service organisations and institutions available because people don't want to participate. It's become a very selfish society. If you look at taxation, we're taking more out of people's pockets, and then they're demanding more from the government. It's a catch-22. Governments are trying to regulate the electricity industry, and yet the only thing that it results in is greater costs for businesses, for families. Utilities are unsustainable. However you measure this, society has not benefited from the social experiments or the economic experiments of the last 10 years. So we've got to change something. Our critics will always say, no, this is wrong, it's terrible, we can just spend and tax more, but you cannot spend and tax your way to prosperity. It is simply impossible. So the Australian culture is unique and valued among many Western nations, a destination of how to improve your life and your family's future. What steps are reasonable to take to protect the quality of our culture without risking the dilution of it by a unprioritised welcome of open borders and
and infinite immigration?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because culture is everything. And just like character is in an individual, culture is the character of a nation. And quite rightly so, Australia is a destination that people want to come to because of our character, because of our culture here. And the platform is, unquestionably built upon Christian and ethos and Judeo-Christian tradition. Under the blessings of Almighty God. It starts our constitution. We should be mindful of that there's a greater being than ourselves. We're also a sovereign nation, so we should never outsource our self-determination to unelected foreign bodies. We should defend our values and our traditions in this country because they are part of the framework that makes it great. And anyone that wants to come here and wants to attack those values and those traditions should really think, well, wouldn't they be better off somewhere else? But there are processes that need to be taken in place here. I think in recent times, people have fallen for the, more is good or more is better mantra that, the more people you bring in, the greater the size of the economic pie grows. And we're all better off. But the truth is, it's not. Immigration is far too high at the moment because it's not being felt by the man and woman in the street and the family. The demands on our resources are too strong. The demands on our infrastructure are too great. Government can't keep up. There are too many people that are coming here and not being part of the team. They're rather detracting from the team in forms of welfare or social services. So we need to reassess the priorities in that respect. We could halve immigration tomorrow. We could then be more discerning about who we allowed in. We could stop the gaming of the visa system that is taking place all around the world in some of our embassies when people apply. We could stop, some of the more obvious routes, the pathways where people come out here, want to be a student. They notionally are doing it to get work and then they apply for permanent residency even though they've never really achieved their student grades or anything else. So there's a number of ways in which you can attack it, but most importantly is we've got to be prepared to step into the cultural vacuum, because if we will not defend what we stand for, what we believe in, what our history, our traditions have determined, then it will be filled by something else that is not benign. And we're seeing that in certain areas of Sydney, in particular in Western Sydney, with the Islamist enclaves that are happening there, the threats and attacks upon our court system, upon people going about their day-to-day lives. We're seeing it in some of the judgments rendered by the courts about excusing people on cultural grounds.
I want to pick that up with you in the next segment. Let's talk about, we'll take a break here, but in the next segment we'll talk about the two major questions in Australian culture today, which is Christianity and Islam.
Sure.
Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.